Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 111. I am your host, Barney Smith of storycomic.com, and we're excited to have back with us the acclaimed and celebrated writer of comics and fiction prose, Stephanie Nina Pitsirilos.
Thank you, Barney.
Stephanie, it's so great to have you back.
I'm very excited to be back.
Yeah, I mean, we were checking email, and you've been an amazing advocate and supporter of Storycomic. By the way, you like say, "Hey, you got to hear somebody else." I honestly think maybe about 10 or so guests I've interviewed. You said you need to talk to this person. So
I have more. I love sharing the love. So
yeah.
My pleasure. There's so many great artists out there and creators, and you're such a great host. As I said, great energy, so positive. So you got to come on Storycomic.
Yeah, thank you. And you got and you said you've got lots of stuff. So one of the things that just happened is last year we were talking about the Kickstarter for speculative fiction for dreamers, and that's full on published September 8th, 9th.
Yeah,
is that what it is?
September 8th. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Published September 8th. Mm-hmm.
And now that's available wide release. People can just ask for it at their local library, according to your YouTube video.
I did a little hunt, so you can go to my website, and if there's a digital imprint of you carrying that book, I list you as a bookstore, and I give you a little shout out, as well as the libraries throughout the country. Right. So I think what's important to remember with this book is that we did the Kickstarter to pay the creators, or the editors did the Kickstarter to pay the creators. It was already going to be published with Ohio State University Press, but a Kickstarter was always part of its model. And this is where you can have Matt back on the show, and he could talk more about that. So it was wonderful that we reached the goal that we could actually, as writers and illustrators, get paid for the stories, but also as a way of doing pre-orders and getting the name out there. So yeah, available. I'm so excited for New York City. Besides my local pharmacy, Ivan's Pharmacy, stocking it and selling out, and I had to replenish him. Forbidden Planet sells it. And I took my family. We're like, we're going to Forbidden Planet tomorrow. I'm getting a picture. Yes, to comic book store, carrying my prose, and not Strand next door. We love you, Strand. You could still order it. But I took a lot of pride that that Forbidden Planet carries it as well. And then the New York Public Library, too, ordered 15 copies, on top of the many local indie bookstores and online retailers.
That's amazing. And it's out already. Is there, and this is not necessarily, but kind of a sequel to Latinx Rising.
Right. Again, not to speak for the editors, but it is a follow-up to the Latinx Rising that was also republished by Ohio State. I think it was Wings Press was the first publisher. Don't quote me. And then it was republished with a new cover by Ohio State. And that one was adult science fiction and fantasy stories, but by a lot of acclaimed and well-known authors. And this one is young adult speculative fiction. And I think how Matt and team, Matt Goodwin, I'm totally blanking and I should not, Sarah Rafael Garcia, and Alex Hernandez, those were the three editors with the preface from Professor Latinx, Frederick Luis Aldama. How they said it is the speculative fiction of dreamers is like a large extended family of writers. But yeah, the first young adult Latinx speculative fiction anthology. And for those that aren't familiar with the term Latinx, it's a more gender inclusive term of Latino or Latina. And people should use the term that they feel most comfortable with. Latino, Latina, Latinx, Latine. It's a big discussion. Not everyone embraces that for their own reasons. And sometimes it's just this concept of, rejecting Latinidad, that it erases Black and Indigenous identity. So it's very complex a label, but one that's used in love and in solidarity with our commonalities. Right.
And it's almost also like a gender neutral term as well.
Yes,
right?
right, exactly. Instead of the masculine Latino, I think how Latinx Rising first published was the Latin with the at sign, right, as an O and an A, and then our conversations continued as a society, and recognized that maybe an X, or some people use an E to be more close to the Spanish language, because then it becomes discussions on, are we modifying language? Oh, but language is something that's meant to evolve. So some people use the E. And I'm not a scholar on that, but that's my understanding of these complex terms. But sometimes, even for me, when I first saw the term, it was social media. Right. And I saw an Asian was looking for Latinx work. And I was like, what is that? And I had to look it up and understand its origins.
Right. Comical Food says, Stephanie.
Christian, hi! Oh, okay. You got to have Christian on. He has an exciting website launching soon. So
really
for later, yes, and comics, and yep, that's your next one. See, I got you someone already.
There you go. Yeah. Send me a message. Yeah, we'll get you on the show. That sounds awesome.
See, pay attention. Come talk to us. You never know.
Yeah, I know. Man,
comic.
And so with that there, and now the Publishers Weekly had singled out the speculative fiction for dreamers as well. Yeah,
we got a starred review, which again I had to look up. So like, what does that mean? But it's a very honorable review in Publishers Weekly, and I was very fortunate that my story actually also got singled out. I don't have the exact wording in here, but 38 masterful stories, as in Jean by Stephanie. Well, they forgot my first name, Nina Pitsirilos. That's okay. And they singled out a few other stories, but so that was a very big honor. Jean has had a very long road, a very hard road.
Right.
So for the anthology to get a starred review, and then on top of it, to be singled out in that way, was very meaningful. Right. But then we kept getting so many other great reviews. We had positive review from Forward Reviews, which they review in indie publishers. Reader's Digest named us one of 20 Latinx books you need to read right now, or something like that. BuzzFeed. Book Riot was for Mermaids Monthly. And yeah, the lists, and then Book Lists, which is the Library Association. So yeah, we just kept getting a lot of great reviews, which is so exciting. And then also LeVar Burton, where's my notes here? LeVar Burton actually selected Lisa and Bradley's story, Tia Abuela's Face 10 Ways. And you can actually listen to it live. You can listen to him read the story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I'll also mention you can also listen to Carlo Yergo Rodriguez's story. Sorry, Carlo, for doing that. How Juan Bobo got to Los Nueva Yorkers. He also reads from his story on Podside Picnic. So there's you can get 2 free samples and listen to these wonderful stories. It's such a great anthology. Prose, there's comics. There's mostly short stories, but there are some comics. I think there's like 3. Yeah. There's some plays and some flash fiction.
Wow, that's exciting stuff. I mean, it's so exciting to see something that you've been working on like last year. Now
this was
long before that, and I guess
yeah, but something that we started marketing and kickstarted last year. Please, there's a saga before that. Yeah. it's all publishing, right? But it does take time.
Right. And you have, and also, with that book coming out, but you've also been working on you also had a comic, what's it called? 51 Solstice?
Yeah, 51 Solstice. So that was published. So that's a comic that I did with illustrator Rafael Romeo Magat, who's Philippines based. And we actually virtually met at DiversityCon. Such a charming fellow, just cold emailed me after. They have these sort of blind, I don't know what you call that, blind dating for, for like writers and illustrators. You just meet people, right? But you don't know who's going to come up in your feed. and our connection got lost, but he was so nice. He followed up and said, "Oh, our connection's lost." He introduced himself. "I'd love to work with you." I was very flattered.
Yeah.
So it worked out for this comic, 51 Solstice. It was published in Women in Comics magazine, their debut issue, Dear Summer.
Okay.
And the call for submissions was, basically, what does summer mean to you? And, I really can't read calls for submissions because I just immediately, a story just downloads in my head. And that's, it's like, I really have stopped reading calls for submissions for this reason, because then I stop working on my larger projects. But in this case, I kind of wanted to flex my prose muscles because I'd been working on comics for a bit. But then I saw that the word count, the limit was 500 words or something, that a novelist just faints when she reads. So I said, let me try a 3-pager. And even that was a challenge because my longest published comic, actually, that's not true. DR 163 is many episodes, but
right.
I'm used to like the 6-pager or the 5-pager. So it was like a challenge. And, I found a way to combine my, what does summer mean to me as a New Yorker, whether it's looking at sunsets in the Hudson, whether it's cramming in the subway, and whether it's the melting tar, this nostalgia and the grossness. And also combine the idea of enjoying things, but not really able to enjoy them because you can't swim in the Hudson River. It might look pretty, but it's a super fun sight. It's disgusting, right? We're quarantined, the whole idea of being quarantined, and we can't travel. So what do we have? We have fantasy. And also my years of being pregnant and being on home rest and not being able to really go and do all those things. So how do I do that in 3 pages? I just put it in outer space. And the role of fantasy. So everything takes place on a space station, but I fed Raphael images of New York City summers, and definitely you need to have him on the show. He actually won. Oh, darn, I was supposed to look this up. He actually won the Warner Brothers, some of the Harley Quinn poster contests for Warner Brothers. I'm sorry, Raphael, I don't think you're on because there's a big time difference in the Philippines, but he does amazing work. He does a lot of space stuff, which worked out for this, and he just really knocked it out of the park. And I'll be quiet so you can actually ask me a question, because I can go on about how amazing it was to work with him and the beautiful art that he did.
So, and that book is that's available now on Comixology, correct?
Correct. Okay. Comixology. You can go to Global Comics. You can actually also order it directly from their website, Women in Comics, as a PDF. Okay. They're a great group. What I really love too about this issue, it has, besides the wonderful comics of summertime, I really loved Dr. Mitchell, the editor's letter to the editor. And it was so heartfelt. It was so New York love. And it included motherhood and what being a foster mother is to her, and what the quarantine has done with the rise of abuse cases in children. And right. I mean, it's just part of the reason why I love being part of this group that includes issues like that, not hiding motherhood. That's part of who we are. We're comic creators, but we also can be, not always, but some of us are, and we embrace that. So it really meant a lot to see that in a comic anthology, that kind of letter, and, not hiding it.
How do you feel? Because a lot of your prose, there's definitely a sense of science fiction about some of the stuff that you put out. Do you feel it's easier to tell something, as you said, complicated through that lens, or is it, you feel as though it adds to it or takes away from the message that you're writing about?
It's interesting because it wasn't until Gene and the Wormholes, and then Andromeda with Seth Martell, and then later 51 Solstice, I was never able to write or imagine science fiction. Like, okay. I started years ago in my 20s. Oh, if I'm going to do this writing thing, I tried to write science fiction, and it just didn't work. So what I did was write literary fiction. Literary fiction that includes a lot of family history as a seed and then fictionalizing it, right? But I'm a big sci-fi nerd, or I have a big imagination or something, right? And I think I'm just able to find a bridge by, or maybe over the years of writing, characters that love sci-fi, inhabit that. Comics actually then gave me permission, or maybe it was just the years of having practice writing, but it wasn't until comics that I was finally able to do something science fiction. And when I saw the Women in Comics call for submissions and I couldn't do the prose and I did the comic, I still did the prose after. And it's a story. It's just 3,000 words. I'm still picking at it, but I'm very proud of it because I really think it took me 15 years to actually get in that mindset. So it's hard to answer that because I guess I would say it was harder. I find literary fiction much easier. Also, there's so much world building I feel that you have to, dive into in science fiction. I mean, we could say the same for historical fiction, but it's just a different type of creative sphere. So I'm at this different, this crossroads now where I'm kind of entered the science fiction realm. Or I will say, and this is where Gene too has helped out, and the work with editors like Matt, and just reading his book, which came out too, The Latinx Files, Matt Goodwin, Race, Migration, and Space Aliens. Yeah, you know what? Hey, you know what? You should book him for that book. That'd be good too.
Yeah, I'll get back on. Yeah.
Yeah. He just released. Reading that and understanding, and even in the query process, I went through that. What's normal to me and my Nuyorican side of my family life is not normal to you. So I guess I live a speculative life, right? I have a grandmother that did misas. She practiced espiritismo, seances. She saw dead people. That's normal. The fact that my aunt's ex-husband's haunting her, that's normal, right? I don't see that, but that's normal to them. And it wasn't until I started reading academic books about how, like Matt's, to understand that, well, this is why we might find a home in sci-fi, because we're otherized. So it's an interesting time for my writing because my comics are now nurturing, I think, my prose and helping me do things that I wasn't able to do before.
Right. And is there something specific about comics that allows, that kind of sparks that sci-fi as compared to, say, doing writing a screenplay or writing a play or as you say, writing longer prose?
I think part of it is just reading comics, which really, I took a long break. Right. I stopped reading comics for a very long time, but I think being saturated in mostly the sci-fi, the mutants, the fantastical of comics, right. I think just that in itself makes it easier, where I wasn't a big sci-fi reader. It was more right. literary fiction, right? So this is where you must read, right? If you want to become better in your craft. So I definitely think that has a lot to do with it. I think that visually it just comes easier to me, sci-fi and comics, and we talked about this in the last show. I don't have the burden of having to build everything on my own, right? I have the beauty of an illustrator, perhaps a colorist, perhaps a letterer, perhaps an editor. You have a whole team that can help build that world with you. And so I think in that way, it could be a bit easier. Right.
So we'll talk about a couple of the other things, but do you have? I have a question, but it should be a follow up to my next question. So
Marty, you're acting like me now.
I know. You also are working on. When we talked about this earlier in the year, when you were on, that you had DR163, your webtoon that you're working with your friend Aaron Guzman.
My cousin, not my
your
friend.
Cousin.
Fight
That's
with
right.
Aaron.
All right. My cousin, not my friend. And so talk to us a bit about that, how that is, where's my, here it is. I have the page already pulled up for us here. So this is, I was going through this. This is amazing. This is an amazing storyline that you have about a doctor and and there is a sci-fi piece to it as well in this.
Definitely.
And we brushed about it. Do you want to talk more about it for maybe our newer viewers and listeners?
So DR163 follows a long lost graffiti artist and a trauma surgeon, where in the magic of their hands turn them into midnight vigilantes. So basically the story explores, it's really a play on both graffiti and medical culture and some of the shared terminology that they have, where let's say, bombing as in war, bombing can mean, you bombed up a subway card, you put like graffiti on it, right? Pieces, the works of art. Did you do a piece? Did you do an art? But body parts, pieces, right? So it deals with these two very hurt characters. One, the doctor dealing with PTSD as being a military trauma surgeon who served in a war. And then also the graffiti artist who does not have proper access to medicine because of pharmaceutical price gouging. So it's very much a social commentary, besides just being awesome art by Aaron Guzman and awesome graffiti, because Aaron is also a graffiti artist. I will say that. Besides that, also being a commentary on those big life things and how these two unlikely characters can find healing and maybe a side of justice. And it's totally inspired by the fact that my husband, who is a physician, is obsessed with graffiti and loves graffiti, or is a fan. I shouldn't say that. That's harsh. He's a big fan of graffiti and graffiti artists. If I showed you this room, you would think it looked like that. And is friends with some of them. And one actually said, one artist like, yo, we're going to take you bombing one night. We're going to teach you how to do it. And, my husband's like my wonderful husband, Clark Kent. No, you're not. You're not doing that. But again, this is all speculative fiction. What if?
Right.
What if he did? Now, he is not this character. He's not a trauma surgeon and blah, blah, blah. But I just took that little bit of, well, what if he did?
Right.
These two very unlikely characters. And then you got the story. So, yeah, we did it on part of Webtoons contest. We couldn't get the last episode in on time to meet the deadline for judging. But Aaron and I wanted to make sure we had it finished because this was a warm up for a business card of look what we can do. And a warm up because I got into comics because Aaron and I are supposed to be working on, this epic graphic novel together, which is totally outlined, first script. But Aaron, being very wise, said, let's do our own things, build up to that, get some experience, and then start working on it. And that's part of what DR163 is. But I delivered script for episode 1 of season 2. And looks like we're going to actually kickstart that for print as soon as he's finished with his mini comic bundles.
So right here you have episodes 1 through 4. So,
right.
So these are you're kind of like, as you say, you're kind of like creating this as like a television setup. So you have different episodes, and then how big is the season going to be?
Yeah. So this one, the second one, and I'll make a note on vertical scrolling. So the second one will probably be 3 episodes as well.
Okay.
Actually, wait, I should clarify. We would probably call them issues because Aaron and I are still talking about this. It's going to be print. So those would probably, it's going to be print. It'd follow more of the standard comic book, issue 1, issue 2, issue 3, or I don't know if we would call it issue 5, 6, and 7. I don't know, Barney. We got to work that out. But, but the idea is we kind of want print, we kind of want something we can touch for this. I'm open, if we're doing 3 seasons at least, to having different formats for each. Although what do you do beyond digital and paper? Maybe it'll be some cool new thing invented. Maybe we have holograms by then. But I have to say I'm going to have a hard time giving up the vertical scrolling for DR163 because I loved it.
Right.
I'm not a digital comics person at all. Like, I'll support it. I'm in digital anthologies. I will force myself to open up PDFs and read for pleasure, but I'm so much of a paper person. But vertical scrolling is totally different because to me, it follows the addictive path of social media.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just so fun. I found it to be so much fun to write for, because it's just, if you go through webtoons, and this is how I modeled mine off of, it's just an eye tease. It's an eye tease of what's next and dripping of one panel into the next. And your senses are not looking at a page layout, and you're kind of hit with kind of everything, your eye kind of catches what's going to happen next. Whereas this is just the slow reveal.
Right. Yeah.
So, maybe we'll have different tiers where if we can raise X amount, that would allow Aaron to also then format it for a digital scroll. I'm sure Aaron is yelling at me right now if he's listening. Because as a writer, I could put out ideas quick, but I do recognize that illustrations take longer. But we're definitely committed. The season's already outlined. It's just a matter of getting the art done and coming up with like how are we going to do this. But we kind of feel it is print.
It reminds me that there's a analog digital scroll is the way to do that. They had. I don't know. I remember when I was a kid, there was that we were able to get this to make your own homemade TV with taping comic strips together. And what you did is that you made a box, like a shoebox, and you took 2 pencils in there, and you took the whole comic book, and you kind of like taped them all and then make them.
Yeah, no.
It.
I know what you're talking about. My memory is when we had the printers with those little holes.
Right.
And then to get the punchline of a joke, my dad would print it out, and it becomes this long picture. It was just funny. But it was like this long picture. You have to wait for the whole freaking thing to print out.
Right.
I don't know if that's the same thing, but that's my memory.
I'm wondering if there's a way, because you're right, because the vertical scroll of this actually does. It is different. It's almost it gives you that ability to, as you say, it's almost scene by scene.
Yeah, and particularly for this, when I wrote the script, what I said to Aaron is that I want to establish that this is the perspective from DR163, Dr. Cave, and I want like a first-person active shooter kind of look, and I think the illustrator equivalent is the fisheye lens. Mm-hmm. I wanted you to inhabit his trauma. I wanted you to understand that he sees everyone as a threat. Like in the beginning, when the woman is about to scan his ID, we don't know if she's pulling a gun on us or not, because that's what he thinks. Right. And I feel like the vertical scroll allowed us cause that to create that mood. And Aaron did an outstanding job with it. And
so what was from the storytelling perspective, once he sees the graffiti, it pulls away and it becomes third person.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So we definitely at sometimes are him, and then we pull out. And we're no longer him. Yes, that's a good point.
So what was that? What was the from your writing your storytelling perspective? What was the reasoning behind that, and not just to keeping it either first person all the time or third person all the time?
I think just to not keep us totally trapped in Dr. Cave, to allow us to sort of step out. I mean, I think what it's probably closest to. No, I can't say it's not third person limited, because he's talking in the first person. Just totally not, we probably wouldn't see, and I don't think we don't see legend unless Dr. Cave's there. So there's certain things that, and I'm sure there's a terminology in writing for this, where you're not going to see things where Dr. Cave's not around, but I'm not going to make the art totally restrictive to his eyes.
Okay.
So I guess that's the difference, right? So it's, because it's illustrations versus prose, I can pull out and allow you to see him, but not necessarily showing you things that he's not in the same room for. And I say that and watch somebody call me out that I messed that up, but I think that was my logic. Not totally faithful to the first person, but the mood is. The mood is.
Yeah. But you said earlier, so you're looking at as you said, you're going to do a Kickstarter with this?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I mean, I have to say that the things we want to do, we're going to do anyway. Right.
Right.
And I really wasn't planning on asking for money for these things, but I've become wiser to understand what Kickstarters are, that it's community, that you're not paying for the product, you're supporting the artists and, even the creators. And even if, let's say, I'm okay with doing this and just, printing it, the team that spends more time on it might not be, right? Particularly illustrators that take, it's just a matter of a lot more work. So, right. Could we put it free like we did on Webtoons? We could, but I just feel like it's such a great story that Aaron's time is valuable. He has a lot of other projects too. My time is valuable. That I think for the second season, now that everyone's got a teaser for what the first one is, I think it just makes more sense if we're going to do that. I know Aaron had some other ideas too, whether it's he's not using Patreon, but a subscriber only for his website would have access. These are things we're open to, but I think we were in the end leaning towards a Kickstarter of some sort, particularly if it's print. It's one thing to devote X amount of hours to illustrate it, but then when you're talking about paying for printing materials and all that, it's a game changer.
Right. And so my question I was going to ask you earlier, you segued in, and I wanted to segue in through talking about DR163, is what's your big project? And you kind of said that, you and your cousin were kind of doing this just to kind of get the momentum going. So what,
that's not my big project. See, I have lots of projects.
You got lots of projects. Do you have like your big world building, like a big,
big
world building project?
All right. So the one that Aaron and I will eventually get to, definitely is this epic world building, historical, blah, blah. Have me on the show another time. Project that we definitely want to keep creator owned, right? Yeah. And a lot of this has to do is where do my stories come from, right? So if it's something that is really coming from the heart now, I kind of want to keep it creator owned, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's something that an editor just said one simple sentence to me, I think you should write this, right? That's it. And I create something because of that, I'd feel less attached to it because this was not part of my grand plan to take over the world in prose and comics. And I feel more detached. So I do have a graphic novel on sub via my agent that is totally outlined. First chapter, Aaron did the concept art. It doesn't have an illustrator match to it yet. I was leaving that open to the publisher. So I have that I spent a year last year doing the world building and research on that one, right? So there's that one. There's the Aaron one. These are all things literally tucked in boxes on under my bed. And I'm actually excited, and Aaron nudged me on this. And this is a pattern in me. Like if an editor nudges me, like Alex Hernandez, one of the editors of Speculative Fiction for Dreamers, he just happened to send me a call for submissions for a comic. And yes, Aaron had been telling me, free yourself of traditional publishing and expectations, forget it. Let's do comics. And, I wanted to do it, but it's also my cousin saying it. But it took then another nudge from Alex sending me just this simple, and he was a big fan of Jean in the anthology. And I was like, yeah, I should do comics. And that kind of snowballed, all these ideas. So all the comics. And it actually, I was like, you know what? I am going to submit something. I am going to actually write a script for Aaron, who at that point had just been interpreting my prose. And that's probably why we didn't go as far, because it's a different art to interpret someone's prose and put it to comics. That's totally putting a lot of the work on Aaron. So Aaron, really, it's like, you need to do an anthology with your collected works, graphic prose, prose and comics. So on top of all of this other stuff, and this is kind of the benefit of being a writer, I can deliver a script and then move to the next thing while the illustrator does it. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm working on an anthology that I am going to kickstart that does have a collection of my works. And it's titled Event Horizon, Stories of No Turning Back. Okay. And yes, its theme is outer space. You're going to have me back, Barney, because we got to talk about that Kickstarter and then the season 2 for DR163 and who knows what else.
So I guess my question to you with this, as you're talking about, is like, where do you see the community of these independent creators? Where do you see this? Where do you see the direction going
for the community of
comic creators and like the groups you're part of?
Their futures? I mean, I have my foot in so many different communities, but I think that Kickstarter and creator own is just going to keep getting stronger and stronger, particularly for marginalized voices, for BIPOC creators, where it's harder to get your foot in the door of traditional publishing. So I think you're going to probably see a lot of people, and you've seen this even with traditional publishers are starting to use Kickstarter. Right. The smaller indie presses are kind of catching on that you can do pre-orders, you can create a market, et cetera, et cetera. So, I definitely think that we'll find more of us there. And yeah, beyond that, I have no idea. It looks like we don't have paper to print anymore in the world or whatever's going on in the supply chain. It's so hard to predict. It's so hard to predict.
And do you see, like, for instance, you're part of, you're on the board of the reviewing submissions for Graphic Mundi. You're also a volunteer panel reviewer submissions on Comics Experience. Do you see a lot, as you said, these smaller ones that are more nation-specific publishing groups or advocacy publishing groups kind of popping up? And is it, what would be your suggestion? What would be your suggestion to writers or creators to how to kind of get above the noise? Because it's everybody is able to make something now.
Yeah. So, the first thing is, you got to be yourself, right? And you got to be sincere, right? We talked about this, about social marketing. Yeah. And Gamal Hennessy actually had a great interview with writer Rich Durick. Forgive me if I mispronounce his name. And this question just came up. How do you not come across as the salesperson constantly and have genuine relationships? My case is so, knock on wood, wildly different in that editors sought me out, or illustrators sought me out, and everything I submit is accepted. Now, I know for anyone rolling your eyes, that's not my life with prose. I've had over 10 years of rejection and 2 novels with prose. So as you roll your eyes, that's not my exact experience. But in that sense, I know that's a little different, right? But how did editors find me? Be part of community groups. The Comics Experience is how I met Seth. And so you're part of a group, but then be bold enough to ask people, right? Maybe you won't ask, forgive my dated, okay, I'll say Jim Lee, but let's also use Afua Richardson, for a contemporary. Maybe you might not ask someone as established as that, but someone that's kind of starting out as you, or maybe someone you admire, and see if they're up to working with you, right? So find community, don't be afraid to ask. But before that, and, Seth says that, be yourself and be nice, because, Seth didn't ask to work with me only just out of the blue. He saw how I interacted in the forum, that I wasn't, a little loony, that I was very positive. That's important. You got to know who you're working with. Energetic maybe, but not dangerous. Positive energy. And then I, in turn, saw Seth's artwork. I saw that he had women of color in many of his illustrations, and that they were done with love and sensitivity. So if you just kind of put yourself out there and be yourself, I'm not saying put everything out for free, but just find your community. You never know who's watching. And again, I just have this weird thing in my life where that happens to be not always the case, but I was approached by Nicole Boos in Comics Experience, and she's a former editor of Marvel, to be an insider art. And, you know, that's how I met Shelley Bond. And Shelley Bond fell in love with my story and insider art. And we've been trying to do something together ever since. And, you know, life put some things on hold. But you know, enjoyed that friendship over the years. So you just don't, you just don't know. If you're doing, I totally lost track of your question, Bernie. So if I'm not answering it, put me back on track.
I'm here. I'm just here for the ride, Stephanie. This is good.
If you're trying to do traditional, that's why I like being here. I mean, I could just do that and you're not going to be like, that wasn't my question, girl. Okay? Back to the subject. I even have a paper and pen. I'm like, I'm going to try to write down what he asked me. But I don't remember it by sentence 6. I have no idea what you actually asked me. If you, another thing, but if you want to do traditional, yes, consider getting an agent. Don't make your whole life stay on hold because of that, right? But if you are trying to break out in traditional, you might want to try to do the whole query path. And there's so many resources for having to do that. You're not going to, their agents have not entered the market for like single issues or the smaller things, right? They're the bigger money things because they want to make money. But, you know, if you want your graphic novel with Scholastic, see if you can come up with something that can woo an agent that would actually, you know, represent you. How do you keep making noise? Yeah, I mean, it just comes back to just being yourself. But in terms of the roles that you mentioned, graphic movie and Mundi and Comic Experience, so I haven't publicly announced it. So thank you for publicly announcing it because I wanted to do it here. So we haven't officially reconvened yet with Graphic Mundi, although I've looked at a submission. But it's exciting to, again, how did I meet Graphic Mundi? Well, first Seth saw a call of submission. Again, you know, domino effect. Right. Let's submit to COVID Chronicles. We did. The story got in a day. Then I'm like, I want to do a story with Erin. She didn't say I couldn't submit to. I asked, can I submit another story? Yeah. Okay. Is it in? Yeah. Okay, great. I have 2 stories in COVID Chronicles. And just being myself. And in that case, I happen to have an MPH, a Master's in Public Health, and Graphic Mundi, which is an imprint of Penn State University Press, was merging their graphic medicine section with their general graphic novel. So I guess, you know, I can't speak for Kendra, the editor and publisher, but, you know, just like hopefully pleasant personality, and then topped with the Masters in Public Health, which can help have an eye for the medical aspects of their graphic novels. It just worked out that I was offered a seat on the board, and I look forward to looking at both adult and young adult graphic novel submissions that come Kendra's way, along with other board members, to give our recommendations for publications. And for Comics Experience, I think it's very much, if to paraphrase Andy Schmidt, very much my different taste in comics, because I think the comics that are on there are kind of that are often workshopped are not necessarily things I read or write, but I definitely enjoy. But I go to a lot of smaller conventions, having the parent librarian, again, I volunteer at my kids' library, and people said, don't do that. Why are you going to do that for free? You could be writing. Well, I love books. I love my kids. I like the fact they have no librarian. So if I don't do it, you know, but I knew it would give me exposure and understanding of book marketing, how to write newsletters, how to get people excited. You know, how you see me on social media is how I am on my newsletters. And, you know, I get to shop for books, man. I get to spend money, other people's money. I'm in for that. But, you know, putting all that together, and the reason why I did go to a lot of these indie conventions and all that was to buy special books for the library that you're not going to find through a conventional vendor. So that being myself and having to be in the community, people then approached me and said, I kind of like what you're doing. It's different. Can you contribute to this?
Right.
So in the same manner, though, as a volunteer panel, different title, we went through one cycle. We just got a new cycle of submissions. I look very much forward to giving my own background and my own perspective and my own recommendations to a panel so that the publishers make an informed decision.
Right. And so, so you did answer the question. So
that's
good.
Whatever that question was, because I have no idea what it was, but I answered it.
Where do you see, because you mentioned like the graphics medicine, that seems that's popping up more and more over the year. Do you see that's going to be a growing genre of comics?
Yeah, I do, simply because graphic novels, period, is. I think as a society, we're totally moving more and more to images as we do social media. There's actually a good book. See, I'm a good librarian. I'm going to look for it. It's called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. Okay, this is a really good book. The Alphabet, my dad recommended this to me. The Alphabet versus the Goddess, the conflict between word and image.
Okay.
And I think we're in the image era where image is supreme. Good book.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see this more and more as we become a more visual society. And then, we have holograms and all the cool Blade Runner stuff that I'm waiting for, not the killing robots or anything like that. So I definitely think that then it'd be logical that the market for graphic medicine will continue to grow because people's tastes have expanded, right? Comic books are not just for kids anymore. They're not the low life or lowly or whatever it was in the 50s right. that people thought. And, they do it, the Graphic Mundi. I just read their Hakim's Odyssey from Syria to Turkey, a refugee's journey. It's a 3-part book. They're just printing such interesting things. Sometimes they're French translations that they reprint in the US. But Kendra's very open. People should look at the submission page because it's not restrictive so far. Right. And they've gotten a lot of attention for some of the books that they've put out so far.
Like you mentioned, as you mentioned a couple of times earlier, is the call for submissions. We might have some writers or artists listening. It's like, well, where do I find these calls of submissions? Is there a central source, or is there a place? Where would be your recommendation to say for have people to find these call of submissions?
So find your community, right? Your community forum, whether it's Comics Experience, whether it's Kids Comics Unite, a literary agent, Jana. Oh, Jana, I'm messing up your last name. M. Yep, there. Okay, maybe Christian can help me remember what Jana's last name is. But Kids Comics Unite is another group. There's so many women in comics. Find your thing, right? Find what works for you. Gamal Hennessy has the Comic Publishing Institute, more of the legal side. And there's usually forums within that. Like Comics Experience, for example, that's where Seth found, there's usually 1 or 2 members that's their thing. They like putting, hey, this submission. So sometimes there are people doing the work for you if you happen to be part of that community. Right. Some of them are free, some of them are not. And if that doesn't work for you, man, go on social media, Twitter. Thank you, Jana Morishima, I think is how you say your last name. Hi, Jana.
Yeah, Patrick's also, yeah.
Oh, Patrick, you're here. Yeah, Patrick. You gotta have Patrick on. We can talk.
We do. I got him scheduled, I think, for February, right, Patrick? I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Oh, I look forward to that. See, Barney, what was the question, man? Find your community. Yeah. So, social media, Twitter. People are always posting on Twitter. Call for submissions. So, okay, how do you find those? Start following comic writers and illustrators and editors. And the ball will just keep rolling on those things.
Right. Yeah. Patrick says community.
There you go. Thank you. You could have saved me a lot of time, Patrick. I was just typing that earlier.
So Stephanie, we're knocking on the hour mark here. So what is so where can people find you? They can go. Is it your main website? Stephanie Nina
Pitsirilos, right? But if that's too long, I'm the Nina Galaxy on that linked tree thing, whatever that thing is that Seth told me to. You know what I'm talking about? The Nina Galaxy. I'm the Nina Galaxy, or as Patrick says, then in a galaxy until we my middle name Nina. On Instagram, the Nina Galaxy. Oh, Barney, I usually have a little card with this written so that I could show you. See, I didn't come totally prepared. And Twitter, I'm actually Zoe Health, ZOE Health. And that's when I opened a Twitter account because I thought I was going to use it for my public health consulting. Right. And instead, I decided it's better to be a writer and a comic book head and a librarian and all those fun things. But yes, I'm very active in social media.
Right. Perfect. Well, once again, Stephanie, you got to come back on. You got to come back on and promote your next books. Look at that. Yes. And once again, thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been it's a genuine pleasure spending the hour with you, and look forward to talking to you again.
Definitely, Barney. Thank you.
You're welcome. Then look at this. You upped your game in your background. I'm going to be like staring at all of your background stuff.
This is at a necessity in a new place. It doesn't have a nice, very minimalistic. I think it's Tito Puente. He's over here.
Yeah.
You don't have to see my whole life crammed in my childhood bedroom.
Yeah.
But something different. Maybe I'll be in a different room next time.
Yeah, and is that a classic X-Men above you?
Yeah. So
X-Men classic, right?
Yeah, Dark Phoenix Saga.
Oh yeah.
So I gotta say, this is where you trip. Okay, so I'm all about X-Men 137. I don't know if you could see part of it.
That
that's the comic for me, right? The one that Jean is kind of based on. But I don't know as a kid if I actually read this one. And this one is 137. If I'm totally going off subject, you could put me in place. But I totally do not remember. And Seth's like, oh, how did you not see that? There's this whole other ending at the end of this after Jean Grey dies. And like, it's in like the chamber of the death of the universe or something right. That it was like a discovery after 20 years that there was like, anyway, it was, I discovered that 20 years after the fact.
Well, then you have Alpha Flight. That's issue number 2 or 3?
This
or
is
4.
4. This
4.
is raiding your brother's comic book collection when he doesn't pick it up from your parents' house.
There you go.